All right. Hello, React Europe. How's your conference been? Yeah. Today, we finally have all of our lovely speakers sitting here up in the line, and you can finally ask some questions. So for the first question, I'm going to exert some host privilege, and I want to ask Ive a question. So have you seen any really nifty XSS attacks on Code Sandbox?
Oh. Hello.
What's the worst hack someone has done in a Code Sandbox?
It's quite hard to hack with the code evaluation, because if you, for example, write something simple like an infinite loop, you will just crash your own PC. So it happened. People tried it, but I think at the beginning of Code Sandbox days we had I found one XSS vulnerability, but that one got fixed quickly after, and after that we only saw DDoS attacks. Those are the only things nagging me right now, and that's one of the worst kind of attacks, because you get phone calls at night from your DDoS checker that you get DDoSed, and then you need to wake up and do stuff. So
yep, pager dude. Yeah, so anyone at the conference can, of course, raise your hand if you have a question, so we can make sure to find you. We have cameras running around. All right, so up here in the front, we got a question, and the microphone's coming to you.
Hi, I had a question for Devin from Airbnb. I was wondering, I really liked Project Lona, and I was wondering, how do you plan to roll this out within Airbnb itself?
Thanks for asking. So it turns out that switching over a massive app on 4 platforms to a new system is pretty difficult. But fundamentally, this solves a bunch of problems we already had. So we're sort of taking it in 2 steps. First, we're documenting what is already in our different apps. So what are all the components on each platform? What are their props? What do they look like? And we're sucking that into one system. So a single universal doc system. And then at some point, we're going to flip the model so that rather than generating docs from the code will be generated from the docs, which will just be your Lona components. So all of our docs are getting generated in the Lona format. And then hopefully, at one point, we'll start switching it so that the components are generated. We haven't done it yet. We're only using Lona a little bit. So I can't tell you for sure, but that's what the plan is.
All right, so I have a question here from the link online. Remember, if you have any questions and you're too shy to raise your hand, you can go to Twitter. We've tweeted from the React Europe account a link where you can put in some questions. It's great. Go do that if you don't want to raise your hand. All right. So I have a question here. What will React look like in 5 years? And I have 3 speakers I want to give an answer for this, who from their talks have some ideas what the future might look like and might be able to answer this question. Of course, anyone else can jump in. Sven, Sunil, and Jared, I all want your answers to what will React look like in 5 years.
Yeah, so pretty obviously, I guess, WebAssembly, of course. So I think the goal is to put more and more WebAssembly into React. Currently, you will have much more overhead than actually benefits, I think. But at some point, yeah, React will be written in C++. This is my point of view.
Actually, that would be pretty cool. I think React won't look like what it looks like right now. I think React is out of Facebook's hands, and the community owns it at this point. So we're going to be I think more people will try and get in. If you watched my talk, I think there'll be way less code being written. React might just be a platform that you render to, you render down to React instead. And there'll be way more tools that actually just use React as an engine underneath. And that's what I want, at least. So I'm selfish that way. But yeah, that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, I also I agree that React will be used as a platform. I don't think there will be lots of fundamental breaking changes to the way that you consume React to the public API. The React team has been very conscious about avoiding breaking changes, making it so there's not a ton of churn. If anyone was using React 4 years ago, there was a lot of churn. Every month a new thing came out and there was new breaking changes. But React 16, the previous breaking change was a year ago with React 15. And so I think the platform will be quite stable, but we will build tools on top of it. And ultimately, what React is written in will not matter as much, right? There might be parts written in WebAssembly, there might be parts written in Reason, and you might be consuming it from a different language. But I think the API will be pretty stable.
Anyone else want to contribute to that question? I think. All right, great. Well, I want to see some audience questions. Raise your hand if you have a question. Right there we have. All right. Smooth, yeah.
So this question's for Lee and Peggy. I have a question about GraphQL. As we all know, our server sides are very complicated and we have lots of distributed systems. And when we put a lot of distributed systems behind a GraphQL endpoint, we're exposing a leaky abstraction, which is I can request a variety of data that may come from a variety of systems with a variety of performance and reliability characteristics. And previously, the GraphQL team has talked about defer and streaming APIs. I'm wondering where you guys are with that, what we can expect in the future. Are we going to get like an array of promises returned? Is there something else going to happen in the future to expose that leaky abstraction more to the client?
I guess I'll take it first. Does this thing work? Okay. Can you hear me? Ah. They gave me the funky headset mic. Ooh. So I don't know if I have any updates on defer or streaming. I think there were some experiments to play with that space, and some of them were interesting, some of them didn't go anywhere. So I think that's still a fertile ground to try stuff out, but nothing that's like going to be announced magically. I mean, all development on GraphQL happens in the public, so if you're seeing it, you're seeing it, and I don't see that much. I don't know if I would characterize it as a leaky abstraction, though. I think you get exactly what you ask for. And we see in both Relay and Apollo apps, people creating like firm boundaries between component barriers. It tends to be not the services, different services having different speed characteristics being the thing that you care about. Because from a front-end developer's point of view, they often don't actually know what those services are. They're abstracted away from that, and that's a good thing. And instead they're thinking like, this part of my UI needs to show up first, and this part of my UI is less important and can show up later. And they don't actually care what services those things are backed by behind those GraphQL requests. And in the experiments where we tried out defer, we realized that it's actually kind of a trade where we add some complexity to the GraphQL layer, and another way to do that is just write two queries. And that's worked pretty reasonably as well. So not to say that we won't continue to pursue some of those experimental ideas, but I think like splitting up your queries to align to the like natural parts of your application that you want to load in a particular order makes a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, and also to piggyback off that, I think kind of before declaring it a leaky abstraction in your application, the most important thing to do is monitor and analyze performance. So we have a tool that can help with that. Apollo Engine is our GraphQL gateway that sits between the client and the server and will give you full visibility into your API with tracing analysis on all of your resolvers. So that way, if you do notice any performance issues, then you can kind of go in and pinpoint exactly where that's coming from. In addition to enabling advanced features such as response caching to improve performance, automatic persisted queries. So yeah, I think before declaring anything a leaky abstraction, it's really important to measure and analyze what's actually going on first.
All right, next up I have a bit of an edgy question for Peggy and Eric, coming from Twitter. Let's see. Ooh. Scroll down a bit. So any plan for real-time, eventually consistent applications, and here's the edgy bit, like Meteor, but better, based on React, GraphQL, immutable data structures. So yeah, I'm asking Peggy, of course, as the GraphQL Meteor representative, and I'm asking Eric because I know Eric is very interested in building universal real-time components. So yeah, that's a question for you. Any plans for real-time, consistent frameworks based on all the React technologies we love?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Meteor is still alive and well. There's tons of innovation still happening in that community. So I would say that's, if you really want something with real-time baked in, I would say to look there first and give it a chance. In terms of like actual, real-time new real-time application frameworks on our roadmap. That's not there right now, but obviously subscriptions are supported in Apollo Server, and I would definitely recommend checking that out if you wanted to kind of roll your own system.
Sure, yeah. I have an idea for a project in my head, and I've been talking to all the other speakers. I've been talking their faces off about it. I know. See, I can't stop talking about it. And I'm pretty excited about the idea of having a database that's basically automatically synchronized between the client and the server. You see that a little bit with Realm, but it's a proprietary database, so like I'm not really itching to adopt it. And the other thing is, you notice that when in our data systems, we have a few source documents, which are the source of truth of our data, and tons of derived documents. We've got these big trees of caches and indexes that all need to be accessed at various different times. And you'll also notice that on the client and on the server, we're often running a lot of the same logic. For example, you might have server behavior, but you need to have that behavior in your React Native app when you're offline as well. So do you want to use an entirely separate data framework on your client or the server? Or would it be possible to have one data framework that sort of uses references and content addressability in order to have like a really reactive and flexible framework between the client and the server? So if anyone's interested in talking with me further about this, I'm obviously very excited about it. Or if there are any other projects that are out there that I totally have missed that kind of do this in the open source, please reach out to me, hit me up on Twitter. Yeah.
All right, I have another question for Maya and Vincent from Twitter, and then we'll take another one from the room. Okay, so thoughts on progressive web apps versus React Native in the future of web development?
So at Airbnb, we're actually investing pretty heavily in progressive web apps right now, and due to a lot of reasons, less so in React Native, in a word. For us, we see a lot of our traffic coming in and bouncing on our mobile website. Our app is right now 120 megs, which is rough. And we see, I think, 50% of first-time visitors to Airbnb.com are looking at things on their phone. And we need to capitalize on those users. Those users aren't returning. And progressive web apps, as you've seen with Twitter, as you've seen with Pinterest, can be really powerful for those people. And for us, it's an interesting problem because Airbnb is not a site you use daily. So those people who see it for the first time, it's really, really, really important that they see it as a viable product. So I've seen a lot of exciting stuff on PWA. Zach Argyle's talk from Pinterest from JS Day last week was like really bomb, and I highly recommend y'all check it out. And I'm excited for that as the future.
So, like, I haven't really thought about that problem too much yet. It's still really early on in my project, but I was thinking about just comparing the web experience and the native experience. And right now, there's such a push towards, you know, the smallest possible bundle size. And whenever I see a trend getting pushed too hard, I start questioning it, whether it's actually valuable or not. And I was just thinking about, like, so I mentioned the bundle sizes of React Native DOM are really large, but they're really large in comparison to, like, the sort of cutting edge web apps. But if you compare it to, like, a native app, it's tiny. It's only 500 kilobytes compared to, you know, the many megabytes that you download off the App Store. So I was thinking, like, if you have this 500 kilobyte payload, that you essentially consider that first load to be a sort of install step, which would be faster than an install step from the App Store. But if it's cached via a service worker, then your next loads are instant. It's like bring more of the app experience to the web. Just something I've been wondering about. I don't know if it actually will work or be useful, but just question what the web can or could be. All
right, let's take a question from the room. All right, I see someone over here on the left. All right, after this, I got a couple of project-specific questions that I'll have to knock out for some of the specialists on stage.
Hi, I got inspired by Expo and ReasonML. Will I run into all kinds of nastiness if I combine them? So,
can you say that one more time?
Expo and ReasonML, can those be combined? Will I run into a hurdle if I try to run an Expo application with ReasonML?
It can totally be combined. Because the compiler turns a reason file into a JavaScript file right next to it, you can just require that compiled JavaScript file as though you were requiring the reason file itself. So you shouldn't run into any problems using Expo and Reason together. If you do, hit me up.
Thanks.
All right, so for Ive, is WASM and web workers possible in Code Sandbox? So can you use WASM today in Code Sandbox?
WASM is not yet possible. It's on the roadmap though. It's something that I want to work on. Web workers are possible. You can create web workers in Code Sandbox and then run them in the sandbox, but they are not bundled yet, which is also on the roadmap. Two things on the roadmap, I'm sorry. But it's, we currently support like vanilla web workers. So you can, for example, return a function that but doesn't use any NPM dependencies. So in that way, web workers are supported, and we're working on bundling web workers as well.
All right, so for Peggy, any recommendations on database and backend framework to get started with GraphQL and Apollo from someone coming from a PHP and REST background?
Yeah, totally. So you can kind of layer a GraphQL server over any kind of data source. So we definitely recommend when people are just getting started with GraphQL to just take your existing REST endpoints and throw a GraphQL layer over them. And you can kind of start incrementally migrating each one of your endpoints until you come up with this GraphQL layer that takes any data transformations that you were originally doing on the client. You can then add those into your resolvers, and then you can reuse it across platforms. So I would say to definitely check out the new version of Apollo Server 2.0. It's in beta right now, but we're launching in a couple weeks, and it dramatically simplifies getting started with GraphQL and building that first server. If you're looking for an entirely GraphQL database, I would say to check out Prisma. They've been doing a lot of really cool work in the space. They just had a complete rebranding and a new launch as well, so definitely give them a look if you're looking for a purely greenfield GraphQL database.
All right, I've got a question for Greg and Sunil. Besides anything that you're currently working on, what projects and or technologies are you most excited for?
I don't know. WebAssembly is one of them. That yeah, it's a complicated question. Yeah, probably WebAssembly and yes, React Native done now maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and Sunil?
Oh, so projects I'm not working on, right? I think, so my favorite thing right now is this little app called Compositor by these two designer folks online, Murmurs and JX and BLK. I think that's Adam and Jackson. It's just a design tool, but that generates JSON. So like you basically drag and drop and you say color, 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 and it generates like little JSON files that you can consume in React components. And it's fairly simple, but like two things stand out for me. A, like designers are designing it for themselves. It's not something that developers have decided, oh, here's 500 megabytes of Photoshop and you should just use this. They're building it like with their own needs, and it excites me to see that designers are coming into the React fold now, like full stream. The other one that I really like is Kyle Matthews' Gatsby.js. It answers every question that every naysayer has had about React for the past few years. Like, oh, React can't be fast. Well, here it is. It's really fast. Oh, it can't be easy. Well, it's really easy. Oh, I can't use Markdown. Well, it just works. So I think Gatsby is something that I'll keep an eye on for the next year or 2 years. Also, Kyle's my friend, and I like his stuff.
All right, let's take another question from the room. I believe I saw over here in the third aisle. We should have a microphone running over, right over here. All right. What question do you have for our lovely speakers?
Hello. With the rise of strongly typed language such as Reason, Rust, on one side, and compiling down to JavaScript and even WebAssembly, in 5 years, will we still be writing JavaScript when we're making apps?
I'm definitely sure that there are a lot of speakers with an opinion on this. Yeah.
There are a ton of JavaScript developers in the world. And lots of them use jQuery every day. Like, there's just a really large group of people that are using JavaScript. And I think the more JavaScript developers we can get on something that has some type safety, the better. So I think there will be a lot more people using Elm, a lot more people using TypeScript and Flow and Reason. I still think there will be a ton of people using JavaScript.
Is there anyone willing to defend dynamic languages? Yeah.
I'm a Lisp junkie here. I want to counter that by saying, I don't think any of us actually write JavaScript anymore, at least not as it was intended. Everyone has their own flavor of build system, some plugin or the other. So to answer your question, yes and no. Is Reason JavaScript because it was built to mock JavaScript, right? So is ClojureScript JavaScript? JavaScript was designed on Lisp, so it shares some of the same things. So I don't think we really write JavaScript anymore, but are we going to be writing functional code with objects and pointy brackets? Yeah, definitely. I think that'll go on for a while, for sure. Anyone else?
All right, so next question from Twitter. Are there any plans to make Lona Designer self-hosted? I use Lona Studio to build Lona Studio.
Can you repeat the question?
So are there any plans to use Lona Studio to build Lona Studio?
Got it. Yeah, so I already used Lona Studio to build Lona Studio. And it's really, really, really good. Can't stress enough how much time it saves. Partly because building Mac apps, I don't know, I hope I'm not going to offend anyone here. It's kind of terrible. A lot of things about it are great. Swift is great, the native APIs are great, but the UI system is just dreadful. And Lona just takes care of it all. And it's magical, and you can mix and match components. The other thing I didn't really realize is when I compile a set of Lona components into Lona, if I introduce a compiler error, then I can't compile Lona, so I can't go fix it. Yeah, once I realized that, I was like, well, I was good up until that point, and so, but that won't be a problem that normal applications have.
All right, so Greg and Maya went really deep onto some web technologies in their talks, so I have a question for them. How do you see the future of React with web components? Yeah, so Maya and Greg.
I think in this conference, we saw a lot of tools to create a React application directly in an editor, graphic editor, I mean like Sketch. And I think this is maybe the future, but it will simplify the work and maybe reconcile designers and developers. But I remember Dreamweaver, and it was not so nice, so I'm a little skeptic, but I think this is the future. We will have some tools to generate directly the React code and then edit the React code, actually.
So are you saying that Dreamweaver is the future?
I'm, as a resident Eastern European, I'm pretty skeptical as well. I think we have a lot of the way to go for these universal kind of component generation stuff, and I work on a cross-platform team, so we have like a component library for Android, iOS, and web, and I've been thinking a lot, like analyzing kind of how we're styling the native components and all these differences and similarities we have, and it hasn't yet convinced me that there's going to be like one path forward for everything. There's always going to be idiosyncrasies, but I think what you're talking about, like the tooling for how we write these web components is always improving. We're always building cool things to make it easier and faster and better, and that'll be changing, but like it's still there, and there are still unique challenges to the web that don't exist on native.
All right, so next up I have a question for Lee. How can one take some of these ideas of an immutable architecture and start integrating it into a large existing app, like Immutable.js and the tools you talked about?
Starting small is important, and I think starting from the architectural ideas rather than thinking about any particular library is important. So don't just say, like, I need to figure out how to squish Immutable.js into my existing application, because you just end up with a total mess. Instead, think about the principles at play. How can I embrace immutability, and then start from the leaf components in your application and work your way up. So how can I make sure that this one tiny component at the leaf does not rely at all on mutation, and it's a pure component? And then how can I make sure the components that render those components also ensure that they're not mutating anything and they're pure components, and work your way up the tree. And along the way, you'll find little bits of state that's lost throughout your app that you need to lift up. And then is a good opportunity to consider how a tool or a library could help you, like maybe Redux, maybe just use React State on its own, but at least then you can have a problem in front of you and decide what the right tool for that job would be. And then once you get all the ways where your whole app is, or at least large parts of your app are fitting this pattern, then you can actually decide if you want something like Immutable.js for solving a particular performance problem, or how other libraries can help come in and make APIs better. But I think starting from the architectural principles and working your way bottom up is the way to go.
All right. Do you have any questions from the room? Get your hands up. All right, in the front we have a couple. All right, Brent's walking the mic over to you as we speak.
Hi. With all this AR and VR stuff and talks, when we get real application which will allow us to work in VR as IDE, like text editor, usable text editor, but currently it's almost impossible.
Sorry, how do you work? Could you repeat the question, please?
To remove monitor and use VR as instead of monitor, but for this you need also keyboard and normal VR things. We get the point when hardware is almost completed this path to be okay for in terms of resolutions and for latency, but we have no software to be good idea to use VR, not to use the desktops and these super big screens. Like.
Okay, so the short answer is I have no idea of an exact time when this is going to happen, but I can tell you that very smart people are working on it, and like a lot of money is being thrown at it. Like not just in Facebook, like around the world, like because this is the this is the dream, right? Like we've been hearing about it since the 80s in the movies and stuff like that. But that being said, I also think that the community can, like, now that the cheap Oculus Go kick-ass device is on the market, I think like regular people should be able to like pick it up and like start writing React and solving this problem by their own. Because yeah, I don't think we should actually count on a company like HTC or Facebook or someone to solve this for us. We should solve it like for our own needs right now. Because if you say like productivity or workplace, like that's such a vast thing. But if we find like 2 or 3 small use cases that as a community we can sit and solve, I think it might be sooner than later. And the resolution on the go is great, by the way. So.
And of course, I want to give Jim a chance to jump in and add his thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we're definitely at the point already where VR headsets are competing and beating normal display devices for general purpose use. So like if you buy an Oculus Go now and you watch a movie on it, then then you're going to have a better experience than if you buy the biggest TV you could buy in the store, right? So like we're getting into that, in terms of a viewing device, VR is already there. The thing that I've been talking about with some of the presenters today, one of the things I think is really great is that we've seen all of our presentations, or a lot of the presentations have been people who've been like, I can do React, why would I use Keynote? I'm going to make my presentation in React and use the technologies that I'm used to using, and then I'll display it on a big screen. And I was saying it's going to be amazing when we all join conferences together in VR, and we have developers who are VR developers having you inhabit the presentations they're doing in 3D instead of watching people building React UIs that we look on a screen, actually being in a space that was built by someone where they're explaining how they built the space because you're in the space with them and they're telling you how to build the space is definitely going to happen, right? That's going to happen. People experimented with some of that stuff in Second Life. I built some demos where I built software that inspected the software that was building the virtual environment and laid out the kind of objects and the relationships between the objects, and I had kind of Spring simulations that would have objects and classes related to each other. And so for that kind of meeting and discussion and explanation, VR is amazing. Whether we'll get to the point where we ever want to be having a VR headset on our heads and writing code depends. I mean, we can get much better at input and haptics and that kind of stuff. But I actually think the bigger benefit is at a higher level. I think the bigger benefit for VR is when we get together in VR to explain how our software is working architecturally, like Lee being in a VR application and pointing to the bits of your application that can be immutable and how they all connect together. I think actually it's probably going to be more valuable to us all than just being able to go, cool, I've got Teletype and I've got Atom and I can pair program with someone, which is something that I was doing in Second Life 10 years ago. So you can already work in VR together. But I think the bigger benefits are when we can actually get together as a group and start talking about the things we're working on and actually looking at it and walking around it and poking it and seeing where we can make things immutable and where we can use reason and stuff like
that. Just so you know, right now he was about to have a meeting with his Oculus VR glasses.
All right, we had one other question in the front.
General question about Redux. I know no one here has really specifically talked about Redux, but I've heard people talk about the new React Context API in 16.3 and suggesting that could replace Redux. Is that a good idea? Is that something that you see will happen?
Yeah, I'm sure Lee, Peggy, and Jared have thoughts on this.
So I would say avoid churn. I mean, a lot of people have talked about that. Like, don't throw out what you're using. At Khan Academy, we use Redux in our web app and in React Native. And even if we could, and we probably could roll our own state management solution. And in fact, we did before Redux came along. And but the benefits of having a library with very consistent patterns that everyone in the community knows is that when you hire somebody, you don't have to teach them about your custom state management thing. That said, I think Redux has had this thing where somebody comes to React and is like, oh, I want to learn React. And they ask, oh, how do I manage state? And people are like, oh, well, Redux is super popular. Let's just drop that in right away. And in fact, you don't need it yet. So don't add Redux to an application just because it's popular. But there are use cases where you get big enough and it's like, yeah, we need this standard practice. Let's use this package that everybody uses.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about this as well. So the new Context API, I think, is an excellent tool to add to your React toolbox. It really solves the problem of like prop drilling, like passing props down many levels in the tree from parent to child, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem of a global store. I do think that Redux is a really excellent library, but it does have a bit of a learning curve in terms of setting up really complex features like optimistic UI and having to kind of roll your own normalization solution. That's what I'm a little bit biased, but I would recommend Apollo Client, obviously, as a greenfield solution. I think if you're going GraphQL, it's a really smart choice. for managing your remote data. It has tons of really great features already set up for you, complex caching out of the box. We recently announced a couple months ago Apollo Link State to manage your local data and query against your client-side cache as if it were a remote GraphQL server. And GraphQL really becomes this unified interface to all of your data. Which is really excellent when you're onboarding new people. You don't have to tell them, okay, this is how we're going to query the remote stuff, and then we're going to use Redux for our local stuff. It's kind of all wrapped in this single source of truth. But I will say, if you have a current Redux app and it's working really great for you, don't rush and like refactor the whole thing just because someone in the community has this new solution that's gaining traction. If it works for you, stick with what you have, and if you're looking to explore something new, just migrate incrementally and experiment and see what works.
I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Okay,
It's
cool.
pretty solid.
All right, question for Vincent. So what are some of the exciting new applications that you can see being written in React Native DOM? I know there are a lot of Electron apps that people complain about being memory intensive. So like what apps do you see would be a good fit for React Native DOM, both on desktop with Electron and on web?
Oh, currently this will probably make the memory problem worse.
Oh. You never know.
It's really early. I see it as basically I just got a little tired of being hamstrung by some of the limitations on the web, and I wanted to see if I could fix it in userland. So it's really like the sort of apps and the sort of user experience that apps on native, that those get, I wanted to bring that to the web because I don't want to go through an app store process again. And I do really like the web, but the little things, the gesture handling, the really smooth animations that like never drop frames. It's not like, oh, 60 FPS most of the time. It's 60 FPS all the time like you get on iOS, and I wanted to see if it was possible to get that. So it's not necessarily sort of just web applications that were never possible. It's the sort of web applications we've built already, but to that sort of user experience standard that people are used to on native.
Would you say you succeeded, or is it too early to tell?
Too early to tell.
All right, so let's see. Do we have any questions from the audience? Hands? All right, I see one in the back, second row, and we're running down. Da, 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 da. All right, here we go. So what do you have?
Hi, guys.
Hi.
I'm native Android developer, and as a mobile developer, we also get excited about using React Native and using the products that you guys provide and make the whole development process faster and more pleasable. But then when we start using React Native, we face the really basic problems of development. Yeah, one of them, the famous red screen, for example, and no clue how to fix this, what's the error stuff. And we get it like every day after even 3 months, 4 months of working. And then I want to know, my question is, do you guys also face these problems or used to face these problems in your React Native products, or it's just us, we are doing something wrong? And also, if yes, how do you handle this?
Oh, so first of all, yes. Like strong yes, inside Facebook as well. It's not just outside. Like I hate red boxes from the bottom of my heart. The first thing is implement component catch. It's great, at least it doesn't crash your app. That's the first thing that you want to do, right? Like you want to catch your errors, and it's so nice that you can do this at that level there. And then like there's like internal tooling at Facebook and stuff, but I think you're right in that we haven't reached the level of maturity where we can recommend something very strongly yet. And I hope it's something the community helps out in. Like, I feel like DevTools could be a little better. DevTools is amazing right now. I don't think anyone has anything close to it. But it should be better if we want to give a better experience to our developers. But component did catch. That's what you start with.
So we definitely still run into rough edges in React Native at Khan Academy. it really helps if you have someone on the team that has been doing it longer, or if you can bring in a contractor that has more experience to be able to get you past the little things. What we found in terms of when we started to introduce React Native, we were just so blown away by how fast we could iterate that we were willing to take a couple of red boxes. The fact that you can have hot reloading just after working with 5-minute long recompile times, it changes the game entirely. So yeah.
All right, so question for Sven. So we see a lot of languages today like Clojure and Scala and Kotlin, which all have JavaScript backends. So how do we see these languages compiling instead to WebAssembly and then implementing their garbage collector in WebAssembly as well? So shipping a separate garbage collector for your language, Reason or Clojure or whatever, alongside your application in WebAssembly.
So I didn't quite get the question.
Yeah, so do you think it's a viable approach to ship a garbage collector with if you're using a language like Reason and want to compile it to WebAssembly?
Okay, so yes, I think so, because you have the Golang implementation, which explicitly will ship its own garbage collector. Basically, it adds around 5 megabytes maybe, like with the runtime and all that stuff. So basically have minimum 5 megabytes of binary. But with the, I mean, it's pretty efficient. It's pretty fast to load into your browser and to instantiate and just run. So I think it will be fine. But also I think that once we have the built-in garbage collector, that will be very helpful, because every language that doesn't have garbage collector yet, I mean, that does rely on garbage collection, will be able to just compile itself and just go onto the web. But I mean, you could technically, you could do it in Rust, maybe. I mean, with Rust, you have to strip out the whole thing and just go without any garbage collection, because you don't need it. So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah. Want to pass the mic down for?
So there's actually a member of the community that's working a lot on compiling Reason to WebAssembly. And it's a very interesting project. But when you're thinking about these compiled to web languages, for some things, JavaScript is a much better target than WebAssembly is. For Reason right now, if you're writing Reason React applications, you want very tight integration with JavaScript. You want essentially free back and forth between creating a React component, that kind of thing. Whereas if you compile to WebAssembly, you're that much farther removed from the DOM and from the React library. So for something like a game or something like where you don't need to interact too much with the DOM and it's just kind of raw computation, WebAssembly is an awesome target. But for something that is building websites similar to the way we've done it before, JavaScript is much better.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Thank you for coming here. Remember, they're all going to be at dinner, so make sure to come up and ask them questions. Yeah.